Imagine this: a young African president, known across the continent for his bravery, humility, and defiance against the West, boards an ordinary commercial flight. No entourage, no luxury. Just him, quietly taking his seat among everyday travelers. But then something shocking happens. A flight attendant, blinded by his modest appearance, treats him with contempt. She mocks him, dismisses him, and humiliates him in front of others, without realizing who he really is. This is the incredible true-to-life story of Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso, and the unforgettable lesson that shook an entire plane. The boarding gate was alive with the usual chaos of international travel. A family argued about boarding passes, businessmen scrolled quickly through emails, and a group of students laughed loudly, dragging oversized backpacks. Among them walked a young man with calm steps. He carried no expensive suitcase, just a plain black backpack. His clothes were simple: a cotton shirt, slightly faded jeans, worn shoes. To anyone watching, he looked like just another traveler, perhaps a student, perhaps a laborer returning home. He walked down the jet bridge, feeling the cool air from the aircraft's open door. The flight attendant at the entrance smiled broadly at the man in a tailored suit ahead of him. "Welcome, sir." But when he stepped forward, she barely looked up, mumbling, "Seat number?" He quietly answered and moved on, unfazed. Settling into his economy-class seat by the window, Ibrahim Traoré looked around. Passengers were busy settling their bags, adjusting seats, and putting on headphones. Nobody noticed him. Nobody cared. And that was fine with him. As he sat, memories of his childhood came rushing back. The dusty streets of his village. The days when he walked barefoot to school, the teachings of his mother who often reminded him, "My son, never forget. A man's true worth is not in his clothes, but in his heart." He smiled faintly at the thought. Even now, as president of a nation, he carried those words within him. He had chosen not to hide behind bodyguards or the luxury of private jets. He wanted to travel as his people traveled, to feel what they felt, to stay connected to their reality. But as his eyes wandered across the cabin, he noticed something. The man across the aisle, dressed in a fine Italian suit, received constant attention from the flight attendants. They laughed at his jokes, offered him extra napkins, and spoke in tones dipped in sugar. Meanwhile, Ibrahim sat quietly, invisible. Some passengers even threw curious looks at him, judging his simple clothes. One whispered to another, maybe he bought the cheapest ticket. But Ibrahim didn't mind. He leaned his head back, watching the cabin lights dim, and thought to himself, if only the world could learn to see beyond appearances. Dinner service began after takeoff. The trolley squeaked as the flight attendant pushed it down the aisle. She wore the perfect smile for some passengers, but when she reached Ibrahim's row, her demeanor shifted. Without even glancing at him, she asked in a flat tone, "What do you want?" Ibrahim responded gently, "Just some water, please." She sighed loudly as if annoyed. "You'll have to wait. I'm busy right now." She pushed the trolley past him. A businessman sitting nearby raised an eyebrow. Another passenger chuckled quietly. It was clear. They all thought this man in simple clothes had no importance. When she finally returned with the water, she placed it down carelessly, the plastic cup nearly tipping over. "Here," she said coldly, "don't make a mess." The tray rattled as it hit the table. Several passengers looked up, surprised at her tone. Some smirked, amused by the humiliation. One whispered, "Look at him, can't even get respect from the staff." Ibrahim stayed calm. He didn't argue, didn't scold. He simply looked at her for a moment. His eyes, steady and deep, seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. It was not a look of anger, but of quiet strength. Inside, he reflected, "This is what so many of my people feel every day, looked down upon because of their clothes, their money, or their place in the world. Today I sit in their shoes once again." He picked up the cup, sipped his water, and quietly placed it back. No reaction, no complaint, only silence, and that silence spoke louder than words. Hours passed. The plane hummed steadily as passengers dozed off, watched movies, or chatted in hushed tones. But 3 rows behind Ibrahim, a group of African students were suddenly wide awake. One of them leaned forward, squinting. "Wait, isn't that Ibrahim Traore?" Another pulled out his phone, scrolling through pictures online. "Yes, look, same face, same beard. That's him!" The students looked at each other in disbelief. "No way! The President of Burkina Faso is sitting here? In economy class, alone?" Their voices, though hushed, carried far in the quiet cabin. Passengers turned their heads. Some leaned across the aisle. Murmurs began spreading like wildfire. "That's Ibrahim Traore? The President? Seriously, here?" Phones came out. Pictures were compared. Eyes widened. The man they thought was just another broke traveler was actually a head of state. A leader who had stood up to powerful nations, a man known across Africa for his courage. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The businessman who mocked him earlier now straightened his tie, watching nervously. A woman who had smirked at him earlier now whispered, "I can't believe it." The flight attendant, still unaware, moved casually through the aisle, but she felt the change. People were staring. The air felt heavy. She frowned, confused. Then she caught a passenger whispering, "That's President Traoré. You've been so rude to him." Her blood ran cold. The tension finally broke when one brave passenger said it out loud. "Excuse me, madam. Do you realize who you've been disrespecting all this time? That man is President Ibrahim Traoré, leader of Burkina Faso." The words silenced the cabin. All heads turned. The flight attendant froze, her face pale. She turned slowly toward him. You're the president?" she whispered, trembling. Ibrahim looked at her, calm as ever, and gave a small nod. The passengers held their breath. They expected him to explode, to demand justice, to shame her for her arrogance. But instead, he spoke in a voice that was calm, steady, and filled with meaning. "Respect should not depend on who a person is. Whether I am a president, a student, or a farmer, every human being deserves dignity." The cabin went silent. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The weight of his words hung heavy. Some lowered their heads, ashamed of how they too had judged him. The flight attendant's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know." "I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked, trembling with regret. But Ibrahim didn't humiliate her. He didn't scold. He simply nodded again, replying, "Now you know. Remember this moment. Treat every person with respect, not because of their title, but because they are human." The passengers sat frozen, stunned by the humility and strength of this man who carried himself not with arrogance, but with dignity. As the flight descended, the cabin was no longer filled with whispers or laughter. Instead, there was a quiet reverence. People glanced at Ibrahim with admiration, their earlier judgments haunting them. When the wheels touched the ground and the plane taxied to the gate, something unusual happened. Passengers began clapping, not for the landing, but for him, for the man who had just taught them a lesson they would never forget. One by one, they approached him. The businessman who had mocked him earlier extended his hand. "Mr. President, I owe you an apology. Today, you showed me what real leadership looks like." The students beamed with pride, eager to shake his hand, telling him how much his courage inspired them. Even the flight attendant, eyes red and swollen, stood before him, trembling. "Please forgive me. I judged you wrongly. I treated you poorly. I was blind." Ibrahim smiled softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Apology accepted. "Just remember, every passenger has a story you cannot see. Every human deserves kindness." And with that, he walked off the plane. No bodyguards, no entourage, just a man carrying the pride of his nation and leaving behind a cabin full of people forever changed. That day, everyone on that flight learned the most important truth. Respect is not earned by titles, clothes, or wealth. Respect is a right every human being deserves. This story of Ibrahim Traoré isn't just about one flight. It's about us, all of us, and the way we judge others. Too often, we measure people by their clothes, their status, their wealth. We smile at the rich, ignore the poor, and forget that dignity belongs to everyone. But on that plane, a young African president reminded the world of a timeless truth. True greatness doesn't demand respect, it inspires it. So the next time you meet someone, whether a cleaner, a stranger, or a traveler sitting quietly by the window, ask yourself, am I seeing the person or just their appearance? Because behind the simplest clothes may stand a leader. Behind the quietest face may rest the strength of a nation. And respect, once given freely, has the power to change the world.